What if the substance that society once feared as madness itself was never the real danger, but the mirror that revealed how mad we already were? For decades, LSD has been caught between two opposing myths. In one, it was the devil's potion, a chemical chaos that turned dreamers into lunatics and minds into fractured glass. In the other, it became a sacred key, a shortcut to the divine, a promise that a small tab of paper could transport you to enlightenment. Both of these stories share the same illusion. They make the substance responsible for what actually belongs to the human psyche. Carl Jung would have seen this duality for what it is, a projection. Whenever a culture cannot face its own unconscious, it projects both its hopes and its fears onto an external symbol. LSD, like any mirror, simply reflected the collective soul of an age that was split between repression and obsession. To the fearful, it became the serpent in the garden. To the seekers, it became the forbidden fruit. But both were still trapped in the same myth, that salvation or damnation could be swallowed. Jung's psychology begins where the myth collapses. He would remind us that no external agent can replace the slow alchemy of inner transformation. A drug may open the door, but it cannot walk you through the threshold. The trip is not the journey, it's the invitation. What truly matters is what meets you on the other side. Your own unintegrated self, the shadow you've spent a lifetime avoiding. That's why LSD is not a light switch for the soul. It's a mirror neutral, precise, and mercilessly honest. When people speak of losing their mind, they are often describing the moment when their ego mask begins to crack, and they see, perhaps for the first time, the vast, raw terrain of their own unconscious. It is not the substance that breaks them. It is the sudden awareness of everything they had been keeping at bay. The paradox of LSD is that it can be both poison and medicine, depending entirely on the one who drinks it. For a mind desperate to escape itself, it becomes chaos. For a mind ready to face itself, it becomes revelation. And that distinction has nothing to do with chemistry. It has to do with consciousness. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Perhaps that is why LSD provokes such extremes of worship and fear. It exposes precisely what we spend our lives hiding. As the world now begins to romanticize psychedelics again, calling them the next revolution in healing and spirituality, we stand at a familiar crossroads. Once, fear made us blind. Now, fascination threatens to do the same. The real danger has never been in the molecule, but in the mirror it holds up. To work with LSD consciously is to recognize that the experience does not belong to the drug, it belongs to you. It is your psyche that speaks, your shadow that rises, your light that flickers behind the storm. And the question is not whether LSD can take you to heaven or hell. The question is, will you have the courage to look at what it shows? Every journey into the unconscious begins with a fall, not the fall of punishment, but of gravity, the slow, inevitable pull of the soul toward what it has long denied. LSD, more than almost anything, makes this descent unavoidable. Once the barriers of the conscious mind begin to dissolve, what rises from below is not the divine light people imagine, but the darker soil in which that light was always buried. Carl Jung warned that most people do not survive a genuine awakening, not because enlightenment destroys them, but because they try to reach heaven without first passing through hell. They want transcendence without confrontation. But the psyche has its own laws. It does not allow shortcuts. LSD simply accelerates the process that ordinary life performs over years. The dismantling of illusions, the stripping of false identities, the exposure of all that was hidden under comfort and control. The first thing that greets many who take LSD is not bliss, but disorientation. The ego, the thin film through which we filter every experience, begins to dissolve. Time loses its familiar rhythm. The edges between me and everything else blur. In that moment, the personality one has worked so hard to maintain starts to feel fragile, almost imaginary. To the unprepared, this feels like death. In Jungian terms, it is the symbolic death of the persona, the mask worn to navigate the social world. Beneath that mask lies what Jung called the shadow, the raw, unfiltered reality of your emotional and instinctual life. Anger you never expressed, fear you never allowed yourself to feel, grief you never mourned. All of it stirs as the walls come down. Under LSD, these forces can appear as visions, sounds, or sensations, but they are not hallucinations in the trivial sense. They are the psyche's native language. revealing itself in symbolic form. This is why some describe seeing monstrous faces, melting worlds, or their own death reflected back at them. Jung would not call these delusions, but archetypal manifestations, the forms that raw psychic energy takes when it is no longer repressed. In alchemy, this stage was called Nigredo, the blackening. It is the beginning of transformation, but it feels like destruction. The old self must decay so that something living and authentic can emerge. Yet this descent is not meant to punish. It is meant to reveal. The unconscious does not attack it, communicates. It shows what has been exiled from awareness, asking only to be seen, integrated, and given a place in the totality of who you are. LSD amplifies this voice. It can feel overwhelming, even terrifying, because we are not used to meeting the full spectrum of our humanity without filters. The tragedy is that many mistake this confrontation for madness. In truth, it is the mind's attempt to become whole. Jung saw the same phenomenon in his patients who never touched psychedelics. Those who began to dream of darkness, decay, and chaos were, paradoxically, on the verge of renewal. The psyche dismantles before it reconstructs. The ego cracks before the light seeps through. This is why preparation matters more than dosage. LSD does not give you visions. It reveals the ones already living inside you. It does not invent chaos. It shows you the chaos you refuse to acknowledge. It is not the descent itself that destroys, but the resistance to it. Jung believed that confronting the shadow was the sacred work of every human being. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. He wrote, "The pain is not a sign of failure. It is the evidence that the soul has begun to move." When you descend under LSD, you are not traveling into another world. You are walking into the unlit corridors of your own mind, the basement where your unlived life still waits. The real question is not whether the drug is safe, but whether you are willing to meet what you find there with humility instead of judgment. Because in the dark, there is something waiting for you not to punish, but to complete you. And until you learn to sit beside that darkness, you will never truly see the light. It was guarding all along. At some point in the journey, the light turns strange. What began as wonder starts to bend inward, revealing corners of the mind you didn't know existed. For many, this is the moment. Fear arises, the pulse quickens, the room distorts. Emotions rush in without name or reason. It feels like everything is slipping away. The ego scrambles for control, whispering the words that have haunted every explorer of consciousness. This is a bad trip, but what if it isn't? What if what you call a bad trip is simply the psyche refusing to stay silent? What if the discomfort is not the poison, but the medicine? Carl Jung understood this paradox long before LSD existed. He saw that the soul has its own way of healing, a way that often feels like chaos before clarity. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. He wrote, "The pain is not punishment. It is the friction that occurs when illusion meets reality." Under LSD, this friction becomes visible. The substance quiets the rational filters that keep ordinary life tidy and bearable. It removes the mask, and behind that mask, everything you've avoided, every fear, memory, or ungrieved loss begins to breathe again. You are not losing your mind. You are meeting it, raw and unedited. When anxiety surges during a trip, it is not random. It is the body remembering something the mind forgot. The racing heart, the trembling hands, the tears, they are messages in the oldest language you speak, the language of feeling. A bad trip, in Jungian terms, is the shadow making itself known. It is the unlived life stepping out of the basement, asking, finally, to be seen. The tragedy is that most people run. They fight the descent. They label the experience as failure instead of initiation. But LSD, like the unconscious itself, does not respond to force. The more you resist, the stronger the distortion becomes. The more you surrender, the clearer the meaning appears. This is why experienced travelers speak of letting go. It is not passive submission, it is active listening. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a vast house. You've spent your life decorating the living room, the part that everyone sees, but the basement has remained locked. During a difficult trip, LSD simply hands you the key. You can choose to run back upstairs and call the house haunted, or you can take a breath, light a candle, and see what has been waiting in the dark. What you find there might not be beautiful. It might be an old grief you never voiced, or a shame that has lived unnamed for years. But when you finally face it, something extraordinary happens. it begins to lose its power. Jung called this process shadow integration. The act of seeing transforms what is seen. In that moment, you realize the bad trip was never bad at all. It was the moment truth entered the room. Of course, not every encounter with the unconscious is graceful. Some experiences leave you shaken, vulnerable, and questioning everything you know. That is why context matters. Without preparation or support, these revelations can overwhelm the ego's fragile structure. LSD is not gentle when used without intention. It will show you everything, even what you are not yet ready to see. But readiness is not about perfection. It is about humility, the willingness to stay present with whatever arises. The moment you say, "I am willing to see," the psyche softens. The images begin to organize. The chaos begins to speak in symbols. And what once felt like madness becomes meaning. So the next time someone calls it a bad trip, remember, there are no bad trips, only unintegrated ones. LSD does not manufacture darkness. It reveals it. And what it reveals is never random. It is the map of your own unfinished story. The true question is not, why did this happen to me? But what is this trying to show me? Every panic, every distortion, every surge of emotion is a fragment of yourself returning home. When you learn to meet those moments, not with fear, but with curiosity, the mirror clears. You begin to see that the only thing breaking apart was the illusion of control. What remained was something more honest, the simple, quiet awareness of being. And from that awareness, the real journey can finally begin, just as the darkness begins to soften. Another danger appears quieter, sweeter, and infinitely more seductive. It comes disguised as light. After a profound LSD experience, when the terror has passed, and the world begins to shimmer with color and clarity. Many describe a wave of bliss so complete, it feels like revelation. They see patterns breathing in the air, feel the pulse of the universe in their veins, and whisper with trembling certainty, "I understand now." In that instant, something subtle happens. The ego, which moments ago seemed to dissolve, returns wearing a new mask. It calls itself awakened. It mistakes expansion for completion, insight for mastery. Carl Jung warned of this precise danger, spiritual inflation. It is the moment when the small self identifies with the vast self and begins to believe it is the source of the revelation rather than its recipient. This illusion is far more dangerous than fear. Fear humbles you. Inflation flatters you. Fear makes you question everything. Inflation convinces you that you finally have the answers. It begins innocently enough. You come back from the trip, and the world feels dull, slow, almost trivial. You try to tell friends what you saw, but words crumble under the weight of the experience. Their faces look blank. Their laughter feels hollow, and quietly, the thought forms. They don't understand. I've seen something they haven't. That thought, just a whisper, is the seed of the spiritual ego. You begin to curate your speech, to present yourself as someone beyond. You may even start to use language of light and vibration, not to express, but to separate. You mistake poetic truth for personal superiority. The ego has survived the storm and learned a new trick: to use spirituality itself as a defense mechanism. Jung saw this pattern in many seekers who touched the numinous, the sacred energy of the unconscious without grounding it. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. LSD, like all psychedelics, can show you the light, but it cannot make you live in truth. It can reveal the mountain peak, but only inner work can build the path that leads there. The inflated ego wants to claim the peak immediately. It wants to skip the descent, the humility, the daily work of integration. It wants the crown without the crown's weight. That is why some spiritual teachers who speak only of love and light eventually collapse under their own shadow. The light they worshipped was genuine, but they mistook reflection for radiance. They thought they were the source. Think of it this way. If your deeper self is a vast broadcasting station of wisdom and compassion, your ego is merely the radio. LSD clears the static, and for a brief moment, you hear the broadcast perfectly. The danger comes when the radio begins to believe it is the station. It starts broadcasting its own signal distorted, loud, and self-assured. This is how spiritual inflation turns insight into ideology. You no longer listen to the mystery. You start representing it. You speak as though enlightenment were a possession, not a process. And in that subtle shift, the flow of wisdom closes. The channel narrows. You fall not downward but upward into a new kind of delusion. The antidote is not to reject the beauty of those luminous moments. They are real and they matter, but their purpose is not to make you special, it is to make you whole. They are invitations, not coronations. After a powerful experience, ask yourself simple, grounding questions. Am I feeling connected, or am I feeling superior? Am I humbled by what I saw, or am I glorifying it? Do I feel grateful, or do I feel chosen? The difference is everything. Gratitude opens you, superiority closes you. A true awakening is not a badge you wear. It's a way of being that grows quieter over time. The more real it becomes, the less you need to talk about it. You move from having spiritual experiences to living spiritually. You stop seeking confirmation and start embodying compassion. This is the turning point, where the journey matures. LSD can show you the light, but only humility allows you to carry it without burning. So, when the high fades and ordinary life returns, when the laundry piles up, the deadlines press in, and no one cares about your revelations, that is your next initiation. It's the universe's way of asking, can you live your truth without applause? Because that is what the real awakening demands. Not escape, not superiority, but service. The ego doesn't have to die. It simply has to bow to serve something larger than itself. Only then can the light you touched stop being a memory and start becoming your way of life. If enlightenment is not something you take, but something you live, then the question becomes, how do you prepare the ground for it to grow? LSD is not a toy, nor a shortcut. It is a magnifying glass placed over your inner world. And what it reveals depends entirely on the state of the terrain beneath it. The ancients understood this principle well. Every ritual, every initiation, every communion began with preparation. They built containers strong enough to hold the sacred. Today, we call this set and setting. Set is the landscape of your mind, your intention, your readiness, your emotional weather. Setting is the world around you, the physical, energetic, and relational space that holds your experience. Together, they form the sacred container that determines whether the journey becomes chaos or revelation. Before you even think about LSD, the first act is reverence. Create space, both outwardly and inwardly, that says to your psyche, this is sacred time. Maybe that means dimming the lights, silencing the noise, lighting a candle, or simply sitting still long enough to remember why you are here. These gestures are not superstition. They are psychological anchors. They tell the unconscious, you are safe to emerge. Jung called this the alchemical vessel, the crucible within which transformation takes place. Without a vessel, the heat of the process burns rather than refines. LSD generates that heat. It stirs the psychic contents until they rise to the surface, sometimes violently. Without containment, what could become gold instead becomes chaos. With the right container, that same energy reorganizes into meaning. Intention is the first ingredient of the vessel. Ask yourself gently, why am I doing this? If the answer is to escape, to feel special, or to chase beauty, pause. The unconscious hears sincerity. It also hears avoidance. A pure intention does not need to be grand. It can be as simple as, I wish to understand myself more deeply, or I want to face what I've been avoiding. This orientation changes everything. Under LSD, intention acts like a compass. When the inner landscape begins to shift, it gives direction to the descent. Next is the outer setting. The body responds to environment even when the mind does not notice. Clutter, harsh light, noise, or unstable company all send signals of danger. Choose simplicity, quiet, warmth, and safety. A trusted friend or sitter, someone grounded and sober, can hold the physical world steady while you travel inward. Their calm becomes your tether to reality. This is not luxury, it is structure. Think of yourself as both the alchemist and the experiment. You are not there to conquer the experience, but to observe its unfolding. Have a journal nearby, a blanket, water, symbols of grounding a stone, a piece of wood, a photograph. Remind the psyche that it belongs to the earth, even as it reaches for the stars. When the effects begin, do not rush toward the light or flee from the dark. LSD amplifies whatever is already present. It does not judge between joy and sorrow. It shows both as threads of the same tapestry. Your only task is to stay curious, to breathe, to witness. Remember, every initiation in myth required a container. The cave for the prophet, the temple for the priest, the circle for the shaman. The container does not limit the sacred. It protects it. Without form, spirit dissipates. With too much control, it suffocates. Balance lies in reverent structure, an environment that allows freedom within boundaries. So before the journey, clean your space, set your intention, and prepare your mind as you would before meeting something divine. Because that's exactly what you are meeting, not the drug, but yourself. The sacred container is not there to make the experience predictable. It is there to make it meaningful. It tells the soul, you are welcome here. You are safe to unfold. When those conditions are met, the unconscious responds not with violence, but with trust. And under that trust, the experience shifts from chemical to communion, from chaos to clarity. That is the essence of conscious use. Not consumption, but conversation. You are not entering the trip. You are entering yourself. The journey does not end when the colors fade and the world returns to its ordinary rhythm. In truth, that is when the real work begins. The visions you saw, the feelings you met, the fragments of insight that shimmered through your mind, they are not the destination. They are messages, and like dreams, they will evaporate unless you give them form. This is the sacred art of integration, turning revelation into transformation. Carl Jung understood this more deeply than anyone. His entire life's work was built on the realization that consciousness is not expanded by temporary experiences of light, but by the daily effort to live what has been revealed. What you do not bring to consciousness, he wrote, comes to you as fate. The meaning of a mystical vision is not in the vision itself, but in what you do with it afterward. LSD may open the gates of perception, but only conscious reflection can turn that opening into growth. After a powerful session, the mind feels porous. The ego, once rigid, is softened, pliable. This is both a gift and a danger. In that openness, you can rewire deep patterns, release old grief, and understand yourself with new clarity. But without intention, the psyche can also become flooded with images and emotions that never find their place. The experience collapses into confusion. Integration is how you give everything that surfaced a home. Begin by slowing down. Don't rush to explain what happened, and don't rush to repeat it. Sit in stillness. Breathe. Let the sediment of the psyche settle. The days after LSD are like the quiet dawn after a storm, delicate, full of possibility. Keep a journal close. Write what you remember, even if it makes no sense. Describe sensations, colors, faces, words that echo. Write not to interpret, but to honor. Jung called this practice active imagination, a dialogue between the conscious mind and the figures that rise from the unconscious. If, during your journey, you saw a child, an animal, a stranger, or a landscape that felt alive, that image still holds energy. Speak to it in your writing. Ask it questions. What do you need from me? What part of myself do you represent? Listen for the answers, not as hallucinations, but as symbols. This is the language of the soul. In doing this, you complete the cycle of transformation. The images that once terrified you begin to reveal their purpose. The child becomes your innocence, the monster, your repressed anger, the ocean, your longing for unity. Each symbol becomes integrated, no longer haunting you from the basement of the mind, but living within your conscious home. Integration is not about analysis alone. It is also about embodiment. The body is the unconscious made visible. If your experience showed you freedom, then move differently, walk slower, breathe deeper. If it revealed compassion, express it through action, call someone you've wronged. Offer patience where you once offered judgment. Every insight asks for incarnation. Without embodiment, even the most profound vision becomes spiritual entertainment. Sometimes, integration feels less like understanding and more like grief. You may sense the old version of yourself slipping away. The habits, the defenses, the narratives that once defined you, they no longer fit. Jung compared this to alchemy, the stage of mortificatio, where the old substance dies so a new one can be born. Let that process happen gently. Transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more fully yourself. In the days and weeks that follow, resist the temptation to chase the high. Each trip is not another revelation to collect. It is another lesson to live. When used repeatedly without reflection, LSD can become a distraction, an escape disguised as exploration. You begin to consume experiences rather than integrate them. The soul becomes full but unfed. Instead, treat each journey as a season. Spring is the experience, the blossoming. Summer is reflection, the tending. Autumn is integration, the harvest. Winter is rest, the silence where meaning takes root. Without winter, there can be no spring. Without integration, there can be no transformation. Take breaks between journeys. Let your consciousness digest. The insights that seem abstract today may unfold over months or years, shaping your creativity, your relationships, even your sense of purpose. Jung believed that the unconscious reveals only what the ego is capable of bearing. LSD temporarily lifts that boundary, allowing more to surface at once. That is why integration is not optional. It is an ethical responsibility to yourself. You have opened a door into sacred space. Now you must close it with respect. A simple ritual helps. When you feel ready, return to your journal and write a letter to your future self. Describe what you learn, what you wish to remember, and what you promise to embody. Seal it. Date it. Read it again in a year. You will see how the experience continues to unfold long after the substance has left your body. Integration is how fleeting moments become permanent wisdom. It is how revelation becomes evolution. Without it, the experience remains a flash of light in the dark. With it, that light becomes a lantern, one you can carry through the ordinary days, illuminating everything you touch. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate purpose of LSD, not to escape reality, but to deepen your relationship with it. To see the divine not only in visions, but in dishes, deadlines, and conversations. To realize that awakening was never meant to remove you from life, but to return you to it more present, more honest, more whole. The true journey is not in what you see, but in what you become afterward. And what you become is not someone new, but someone real. There comes a moment in every genuine awakening when the silence grows heavy again, not with mystery, but with responsibility. After the vision fades, after the insights are written and the emotions have softened, you must step back into the world that hasn't changed. The same streets, the same conversations, the same faces unaware of what you've just witnessed. And this is where many seekers falter, because the world often feels too loud for the silence you've discovered, too shallow for the depth you've touched. You walk among people you love, yet feel a strange distance, as if your inner frequency no longer matches the collective rhythm around you. Jung understood this paradox well. He wrote that individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, inevitably creates a sense of separation before it leads to connection. You have seen something others haven't, and for a while, that light can feel like exile. This is the test of integration, not just understanding your truth, but embodying it amid contradiction. The return is not about preaching what you found, but living it quietly, steadily. You are not called to be a prophet, but a presence. In myth, every hero who descends into the underworld must eventually climb back, not for glory, but to share what they've learned. Orpheus brings music, Prometheus brings fire. You bring awareness, the flame of consciousness carried through ordinary life. The real miracle of LSD is not what it shows you in the trip, but what it helps you remember in the grocery line, during an argument, or while standing in the rain. At first, you may want to explain what happened, to make others see it, but awakening cannot be transferred through words. It is transmitted through being. So instead of trying to convince, embody. Let your calm become your message. Let your kindness become your philosophy. Let your silence carry more truth than any lecture could. The world does not need more awakened talkers. It needs awakened doers, people who have walked through their own chaos and returned with humility, patience, and empathy. The one who has faced their shadow no longer reacts from fear. They listen deeper. They love slower. They create space for others to unfold. This is how your inner work ripples outward quietly, invisibly, powerfully. You may feel a lingering loneliness, a sense that the world no longer fits you. But understand this, that loneliness is not punishment. It is refinement. It means you've outgrown certain frequencies. It means you are being invited to curate your connections, to find those who vibrate with similar depth. Seek not the crowd, but the circle. A few sincere companions are enough to sustain the fire. And above all, remember this truth. Returning does not mean descending back into illusion. It means bringing your clarity with you. Jung said, "No tree," it is said, "can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." You've descended, you've seen, you've touched both. Now your task is to live as the bridge between shadow and light, spirit and matter, silence and speech. Do not rush to escape the ordinary. The ordinary is where divinity hides. Every small act done with awareness, washing your hands, speaking truth, forgiving someone who once hurt you becomes a form of prayer. The journey, then, completes its circle. The goal was never to stay in the vision, but to let the vision teach you how to see. You are not meant to remain in the mountain's peak. you are meant to bring its view back down to the valley. And when you do, quietly, without announcement, you realize something profound. The return was never about coming back to the old world. It was about discovering that the world, too, had been waiting for you to return to it, awake. There is a sacred rhythm to awakening, and like all sacred things, it has its own timing, but our modern age has forgotten this. We live in a culture that worships acceleration, that wants enlightenment instantly, without the seasons of ripening, without the slow shaping of the soul. The young are told that there are shortcuts that with the right substance, the right dose, they can pierce the veil and taste eternity. And some do, but what they find is not always paradise. Carl Jung warned that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. But what he did not mean was that you should rush to dig before the roots have even formed. The adolescent psyche, brilliant, curious, on fire with longing, is still under construction. Its foundations are wet clay. Its architecture of identity is being laid brick by brick through experience, heartbreak, and patience. To introduce LSD into that tender architecture too soon is like striking lightning into a cathedral still being built. The light may be beautiful, but it can also shatter the structure. The beams twist, the scaffolding burns, and the soul, suddenly flooded with truths it has no language for, feels lost in its own ruins. Science now echoes what Jung intuited. The human brain continues to develop well into the mid-20s, especially the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, impulse control, and long-term perspective. LSD, with its power to dissolve boundaries, can open doors. The young psyche is not yet equipped to navigate. The result is often confusion, mistaken for enlightenment, chaos mistaken for creativity, or despair mistaken for depth. It's not that the experience itself is evil, it's that the container isn't ready. Just as an alchemist would never pour molten gold into a mold that hasn't cooled, so too must the seeker respect the form their soul is still shaping. The psyche needs structure before it can survive its own expansion. There's a quiet heroism in waiting, in building your foundation before opening the gates, in learning through grounded experience, love, disappointment, solitude, work so that when the time comes to meet the infinite, you have the strength to stand in it. This is what Jung called earning your symbols. Without lived experience, symbols have no roots. They become decorations of the mind instead of truths of the soul. So to the young seekers drawn to the path of awakening, be patient. Your yearning is holy. Your curiosity is sacred. But the soil of your being must first become rich enough to hold what you wish to plant. The universe is not withholding enlightenment from you. It is preparing you for it. Until then, there are other forms of awakening: meditation, art, service, silence. These, too, open the unconscious gently. Through life itself, rather than through chemistry, they allow your cathedral to rise strong and true so that when the lightning finally comes, and it will, it illuminates, not destroys. Remember, the light you seek is not going anywhere. It has been patient for millennia. It will be patient for you. What matters is not how soon you reach it, but how deeply you are able to hold it when you do. To awaken too early is to risk mistaking the first spark for the sun. To awaken when ready is to become the sun itself, steady, luminous, and enduring. So let this not be a prohibition, but an invitation to wisdom, to respect timing, to honor your unfolding, to build your foundation with care so that when your time comes, you can stand before the infinite, not as a visitor, but as a vessel, because the true awakening is not in seeing the light. It is in learning to bear it. In the end, the real journey was never about LSD at all. It was about what it revealed not in the sky above you, but in the chambers within. The chemical was only a key, and the key was never the treasure. The treasure was the self, the one you keep running from, yet secretly long to meet. Carl Jung believed that every genuine act of awakening begins with a descent, a confrontation with one's own shadow. We spend so much of life trying to ascend, to be lighter, happier, wiser, but light without darkness is blindness. Growth without grounding is escape. LSD, in its mysterious way, collapses that illusion. It takes you not upward, but inward, into the architecture of your own psyche, into the rooms where you've hidden your fear, your grief, your hunger for meaning. And there, in that sacred confrontation, the medicine does its real work. It mirrors what is already alive inside you. It shows you your wounds, not to punish you, but to invite you to heal. It shows you your beauty, not to inflate you, but to remind you what you've forgotten. For some, that mirror feels like grace. For others, it feels like hell. But in truth, it is neither. It simply reflects the unfinished conversation between your soul and your shadow, the dialogue you were born to complete. LSD cannot make you whole. It can only reveal where wholeness is missing. It cannot give you meaning. It can only strip away the illusions that have buried it. That's why some people emerge from the experience radiant and renewed, while others spiral into confusion. The difference is not in the substance, it's in the readiness of the vessel, the courage of the witness, the honesty of the intention. Throughout this exploration, we've seen the pattern, the preparation, the set and setting that create safety, the descent meeting the shadow without resistance, the illumination where insight rises from the dark like gold from ore, the integration turning fleeting vision into lived truth, and finally, the return bringing the light back to the ordinary world. This cycle is not unique to LSD. It is the architecture of every true transformation. It is the same pattern found in ancient initiation rites, in alchemy, in the hero's journey, and in Jung's psychology. Each one teaches the same lesson. Awakening is not an event, it is a discipline. It is the art of remembering, over and over, who you truly are beneath the masks of survival. So as we close, let us be honest. LSD is neither the villain our culture once feared, nor the miracle it now romanticizes. It is simply a mirror, a profoundly neutral tool that reflects back whatever you bring to it. If you come with chaos, you will see chaos. If you come with humility, you will see wisdom. That mirror is both ruthless and compassionate. It cannot lie, and that is why it is sacred. To look into it is to accept responsibility. To stop blaming the world, or the drug, or the divine, and to recognize that everything you encounter is an expression of what you are becoming. And yet, the mirror is not the goal. The goal is to learn to see without it. When you can walk through ordinary days through grief, laughter, boredom, beauty with the same clarity you once touched in that altered state, then the real awakening has begun. That is when you no longer need LSD to show you the divine. You begin to see it everywhere, in the eyes of a friend, in the hum of the city, in the stillness of your own breath. Jung once wrote, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious." This is the essence of the path. The light was never something to chase. It was something to uncover, hidden beneath the dust of denial and fear. LSD, at its best, helps sweep that dust away, but it is your task to keep the room clean. So if you choose this path, do it with reverence, not as a way to escape yourself, but as a way to meet yourself, not as rebellion, but as devotion to truth, to wholeness, to life itself. Because when the trip ends and silence returns, what remains is you, the same you who was always there, waiting behind the noise, behind the striving, behind the story. And that, perhaps, is the final revelation. You were never meant to become extraordinary. You were meant to become real. So let the mirror do its work. Let it show you what is broken, what is beautiful, what is true. But remember, the reflection is not the face. When you finally meet the one who's been looking back, you'll understand the journey was never about LSD. It was about learning how to see yourself clearly, courageously, completely. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to pause, breathe, and remember what you saw within. Then, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who walks the same path. I read every comment, so tell me, what has your shadow been trying to show you lately?